We'll go ahead and get started. I don't see anyone else looking to join this last minute. And I am Karen Roberson. I know a lot of you. And for those of you who don't know me, I have been with Oasis working on Stage 100 for 30 years now. I just celebrated my 30th anniversary. And I've been working with various ERP softwares over 40 years. And no, I was not 10 years old when I started, I promise. um, so I'm really excited that you'll have joined in for this today. It's not real difficult stuff that we're going to go through, but I know it's very helpful because we're getting close to the end of the year. Hard to believe that Thanksgiving is already this week. So hopefully I'll be able to share a lot of hints with you all and make your jobs a little bit easier as we get closer to the end of the year. So real quick, if anybody has questions during this webinar, if you look at your the bottom of the screen, you've got your tray where there's the icons. One of those is a Q&A. So if you open that up, you can type questions in. I'll try to keep my eyes on that so that we can answer those as we go. If you stump me or if we do run out of time, then I'll make sure I'll get back with anybody that has any questions. So with that, I think we'll get going. So today's webinar is about Stage 100 closing order of modules. So a real quick hint about this. So you'll see over here on the left, I have the list of my modules. So mine are in the default order, if you will, of how the menus come into Sage 100. Now, I know a lot of you have yours set up so that they're in alphabetical order. So for those of you who aren't aware of that option, if you go into View, got options over here to the right, sort the module list. So I click that button, see how my modules are now listed in alphabetical order. And I can also choose to sort my menus over here if I choose. And what I'm going to recommend, the easiest way to remember about the closing order of the modules is to start at the bottom and go up. So if you do have yours set so that they're in alphabetical order, then make a note that when you go to the View menu, unclick your Sort Module List, and then that just makes it easier for you to remember, oh, let me just start at the bottom and I work my way up. And the reason for that is just the way from the very beginning when this was created, the natural order of things. If we were to start at the top, once we start getting to the working modules, general ledger, you can't do anything until you set up a general ledger. You've got to have your chart of accounts. And then it just built from there. You've got your accounts payable and your accounts receivable. You can't do anything with inventory if you don't have those. And then payroll comes into it. So it just makes for a logical progression. All right. Before we dig into any further into that, this is a really good point that we can talk about backups. So, it's always a good idea to make sure you've got regular backups. And we're going to take a deeper dive in just a few minutes, and I'm going to show you some of the setup options. And we have had over the years some instances where, however it happened, people have had their history set only keep for 1 or 2 years, and then when you perform your year-end processing, it would eliminate some of the older history. And the only way to recover from that is to restore from backup. So it's kind of my rule of thumb is I like to do this first thing in the morning after I know I've got a good backup from the night before. And then another point is pretty much everybody has to be out of the system when you're running these period end processing. It's not 100% everybody has to be out of everything for every module, but there's just a lot of integration between the different modules. So, you know, like inventory, you would think it would be okay if somebody had their customer maintenance or vendor maintenance open, but those screens actually utilize the inventory module because there's places where you can look at the inventory history. So it, again, general rule of thumb, it's just a lot easier if you just get everybody out while you're running it. Okay, so now I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into what I said earlier about the history settings. So I'm just going to pick on accounts payable as a starting point. So in my setup menu, I have accounts payable options. And in the case of accounts payable, if I go to tab 2, I have this option of months to retain paid invoices. So depending on what version you're running, it will either say days or months to retain paid invoices. And this is one of the things that happens when you run period end for accounts payable. It looks at any of your invoices that are in the open invoice file. And if it's a zero balance, it looks to see, I mean, generally it's because the invoice has been paid, but if you think about the fact that, you know, maybe you had a credit memo against it, so that zeroed it. So it looks to see when it went to zero, what was the date of that? And then it looks to see if that date is more than this amount of time. If so, it removes it from that open invoice list. Now you still have your deep history. You know, you always still have that invoice history, your check history. You're not losing that. You're just losing that quick access that's in your vendor maintenance or customer maintenance. So the other thing that is important is most of your modules have a tab for history, and you designate in there how many years of history you're keeping. So when you do your year-end processing, it will look to see what these settings are, and then it goes through your history and it determines if that history is old enough for it to remove it from Sage 100. All right, remember, if you all have any questions as we're going through this, put it in the Q&A section. I'll answer them as we go along. All right, so there are some modules that have some exceptions to some things. So as we go through, we'll mention these. Now, not everybody has all of these modules. So, you know, if it doesn't apply to you, you can tune me out for a moment, not too long. So let's see, nobody has e-business manager anymore, so we don't need to talk about that one. Fixed assets, if you have Sage fixed assets and you have it linked into Sage 100, then the period in processing will generate your journal postings into the general ledger for your depreciation. Right? And then moving on up, Visual Integrator doesn't have a period in. Your material requirements planning, if any of you have that module, that only does anything at the end of the year, and it if you're familiar with the material requirements planning, you know that one of its tenets is to look at past history for the year, so it looks last year, and it keeps that in some work tables. And then when you run this period in processing at the end of the year, it just cleans that out. All that is. Mobility or barcode, that just has an option to clear some import history, still there. And bank reconciliation, it does not have a period in processing. This is one of those modules where it, you know, as you're doing your bank reconciliation, you know, one of the things of that process is when you get to the end and you've reconciled for the month, it asks you if you want to purge those cleared transactions. So there is no true history in the bank reconciliation module. The only history you get is from the reports, and you know, an important reason why to make sure you get those recorded in Office module. Moving up, bill of materials. It does not have any kind of period in processing. Job cost does. So your period in processing here, this is a good time to tell you the single most important reason to run your period in processing is so that when you have finished processing one of the periods and you've printed all your reports, everything's finalized, if you run that period in processing, nobody can either purposely or accidentally make a posting to that period that's been closed. So again, the number one reason to run the period in processing on a routine basis is to make sure that when you've finalized one of your periods, nobody accidentally posts to that period and changes your numbers. So the other thing that job cost will do when you do your period in processing, if you've set the option to keep the history, it will take any jobs that you have closed and that have been completed and closed and finalized. It will move those into your job cost history. All right, so just moving up the menu, return merchandise authorization, RMA, it does not have a period end. Purchase order, it does. You've got a period in processing, and out in the purchase order options, this is another one that has a special setting. So my purchase order options, I've got the days to retain completed purchase orders. So as long as you're on a fairly recent version, you have purchase order history now. Some of the older versions did not, but I think all of you should have that now. But the other thing about purchase order history, so to speak, is the days to retain completed purchase orders. So when you run period in processing, it will look at all purchase orders that have a status of completed. If it was completed more than that number of days ago, it will remove it from your open purchase order list. So again, you still, if you've got a new enough version, you've got a purchase order history, and you can still go to that purchase order history to look at those past purchase orders. All right, so this is also a good one to point out something else that's special about purchase order. You've got a purchases clearing report. I like to point out that purchases clearing report, that is at a moment in time. That is right now. So, if you wait till the 10th of the month and then you want to see, did it match what it was at the end of the prior month, you can't do that. Now, there is depending on what version of Sage you've got, you may have purchases clearing from history report. It's fairly new, so some of you probably don't have this yet. So this one does give you the opportunity to go back and look at something prior to just today. So since we're in here, we're doing a deeper dive. This is also a good time to point out. When you opened your period in processing, I'm sure you've all noticed that you've got this little checkbox to print period in reports. And what that means is each of the modules that you run the period in, it's got a period in report selection. So Sage 100 has a pre-made list of possible reports. So most of you, I know, by the time you're ready to close the period, you've already run these reports, so you don't need them. And if you don't want to have to worry about clicking that checkbox every time, if you open this up, you can remove the reports. Or maybe you do like to run them at the point of doing your period in processing, but you don't do all of them. Like, you don't run the expected delivery report. I could just remove that one. So I click on that line. I just click my little red X to delete that row. Don't need that one. So I just go through and I remove whichever ones I don't need. Now, if maybe there is a custom report that we've created. If I wanted to make sure I get that one run at the end of the month, I can come down here to the bottom of the list and I can add a report. So when I click that magnifying glass, this is a list of all of the standard reports, the reports that are in Sage 100 already. And it's also a list of any custom reports. And typically your custom reports are going to be at the bottom of the list because it just does them in the order in which these reports were created. You can add one. And then the other thing you can do, you'll notice I have another column here for report setting. And see, these all say standard. So I don't know if any of you or if all of you are familiar with the fact that you can create custom report settings. And if you do, then you can designate which report setting you want. Now, this particular one, I've only got the standard report, so I don't have another option there, but you can tell it which of your report settings you want. All right, I hope that information was helpful to you. I'm gonna double check my cheat sheet here, make sure I didn't forget anything. All for purchase order. And then sales order, it just has the history settings, number of years you want to keep. The number of years you want to retain your sales history. So each time you run the period in processing, I'm sorry, when you run it at the end of the year, it looks at this setting to see if there's any history that should be removed. Right? Inventory, so it has the same settings, how many years you want to keep your history. Now, inventory does have something special that the other modules don't, because with inventory, you have your valuation report, you have your valuation report by period, and you have your inventory trial balance report. So those last two, the inventory trial balance report and the inventory valuation report by period, those are designed so that you can run those at any point in time and tell it to look back at another period, whether it's been closed or open. Now, in order for that to work properly, Sage has what it considers to be like a running balance. And some of you that have been on Sage 100 for a while, you might have noticed that in your inventory, if you look at your transaction history, so I'll see what I'm referring to. On my transactions tab, so you might notice a type that's called IX, conversion history. My data here is sample, so there's all kinds of things that happen in here. But if you see something that's IX, what that really means is, like, maybe you've told it to keep 10 years of your transaction history. When you reach year 11, it's going to remove those transactions from your history. But what it does is it creates this IX record that is an accumulation of the data that it deleted. So imagining there's a couple of, that's what that's always been for. A couple more points about inventory. You have your inventory valuation report, and that's another one where when you run it, it is for right now, this point in time. Now, the inventory valuation report by period, that does allow you to go back, like right now, we're at the 20th of November. If I wanted to run it for October 31st, I can do that. You can set the date back. It is not totally 100% reliable, though. So if you're running this report or even the trial balance report and they're not matching your general ledger at all, my recommendation to everyone is always go and just run the inventory valuation report. First of all, make sure you got all your general ledger postings updated. Then run this report, and then look in the general ledger. Make sure you don't have any future years. Sometimes people will fumble finger as they're typing in a date, and it'll post to something way out in the future. So make sure you've not got any of those transactions, and then compare that to your general ledger. That gives you a truer picture of whether or not your general ledger is in balance. Okay. And moving along, payroll. Your period end processing, you only do this for your quarters. So I don't know if there's anybody out here that has the old payroll. If so, it's very important that you run your quarterly reports before you run your period end processing. Everybody that I recognize on here that has payroll, you've got the newer payroll, that it's a lot more flexible. It keeps each of the quarters history, so it's not as time critical that you do that period end processing. And you only do the period end processing and payroll for the quarter. So moving on up, accounts payable. I already showed you in the accounts payable options. So it goes through and it's looking for, how many years you told it to keep your history. And then it looks to see, back up just in case that helps you all remember, your months or days to retain paid invoices. So it looks at each of your invoices that have a zero balance to determine if it's going to remove it from the open invoice list. Then the only other thing that this does is it bumps your current period by 1. So each of these modules that has period end processing, it will bump this current period. And then if you're at the year end, it'll reset from period 12 to period 1 and then bump your current fiscal year by 1. And same thing for accounts receivable. It has the exact same settings as accounts payable. So it goes through and looks to see if there's any open invoices there that need to be removed. And then your general ledger, the only thing that general ledger does throughout the month, so as you're closing those periods before you get to the year end, is bump that current period by 1 so that you cannot post to a period that you've already closed. Right. Make sure I haven't missed any other important points. I got everything we needed to cover. So I do want to show you, because we get this question sure at least once a month. So it's really nice to close the periods once you know you're done, so that nobody accidentally posts to a closed period. But there are times when you need to go back and you need to post to a period you've already closed. And that's okay. So you just go, like if it was the general ledger, and this can be any of the modules, you just go into your options and you set it back. So let's say, I got my year-end adjusting entries from the CPA. I could go set this back to period 12 of the prior year. It's okay to set these backwards. So you can reopen a period. No problems with that. But what you don't want to do, don't come back in here after you've made those journal entries and set that back up to 2023. That is not a good thing. You need to go run the period end processing again, because at the end of the year, there are some things that are going on inside of Sage 100. So, good rule of thumb, it is fine to go back in time in these options, and that's true for all of the modules. You can go backwards, but don't jump forward on those years. So I'm going to reiterate the importance of those backups, because like I said, we have had people who, however it's happened, years to retain general ledger history, it got changed to 2 years, because I think that's actually the minimum it will let you do. So after they closed their year, they found out that they had lost all of their, they had only what their new current year was and the prior year. They lost all the previous ones. So we had to restore from backup to get that back for them. And that was all I had for you all. If anybody has any questions, please put them into the Q&A. I will be happy to stay on for a little while and answer any questions that you all have. If not, then I thank you very much for your time today. You all have, everybody have a great Thanksgiving. Be safe.